Good morning. It's 9 o'clock. We'll officially call the March 27th meeting of the Douglas County Board to order. For the public, there's a copy of the Open Meetings Act over on the north wall. Also, there is an automatic external defibrillator available in the back of the room if anybody needs that for some reason. And also, I'd like to note that if you could, to please turn off or silence your cell phones for the meeting. With that, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
With that, we'll call to order the Douglas County Board of Equalization meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Morrison?
Here.
Commissioner Boyle?
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Duda?
Here.
Commissioner Kraft?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Mr. Chair.
Here. Item A is approval of the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, March 20th, 2018. Item B, call for a meeting and set Tuesday, April 10th, 2018 as the date for hearing on the certified assessments and corrections. It's the will of the board. Motion by Commissioner Duda, seconded by Commissioner Boyle. Please vote.
Motion passes. All commissioners voting yes.
Item C, citizens' comments. This is an opportunity for individuals to comment on items that are not listed and pertaining to the Douglas County Board of Equalization agenda. Are there any citizens' comments at this time? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair,
Oops, sorry.
could I just remind, we received word that folks who are listening in on our meetings are not hearing us. So just to remind us to speak and keep our microphones close when we're speaking so they may be able to hear us better.
Excellent point. With that, we'll go to resolutions. D, if nobody has anything to be removed, there's D, E, F, and G. That is a motion to approve D, E, F, G, and adjourn. Okay, motion by Commissioner Kraft, seconded by Commissioner Boyle. Please vote.
Motion passes. Commissioner Boyle is abstaining. All other commissioners voting yes.
Mike, I think officially we need to state it, so I don't know if you want to state it just to be legal.
I have a conflict. I should have called it out, but I forgot to, so. But I have a conflict, so I couldn't vote on it.
We will now call to order the Douglas County Board of Commissioners meeting. Roll call.
Commissioner Borgeson? Commissioner Boyle? Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Duda? Commissioner Kraft? Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Mr. Chair.
Here, item 1, minutes and claims. Letter A, approval of the minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held Tuesday, March 20th, 2018. Item B, approval of claims submitted for payment and process through Tuesday, April 3rd, 2018. It's the will of the board. Is there a motion? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. Please vote.
Motion passes. All commissioners voting yes.
Item 2 is the consent agenda. There are 14 items on the consent agenda. I would ask if we could take item J3 separately. Is there any other requests from the board?
Move approval of the consent agenda plus item J3.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Morgan. Please vote.
Okay. Motion passes. Commissioner Boyle is abstaining. All other commissioners voting yes.
And I apologize again, I have 2 items that I have to abstain on here, so sorry about that. The rest I support totally.
Is there a motion to approve item J3? Motion by Commissioner Duda, second by Commissioner Morgan. I need to abstain because I sit on that board. Please vote.
One moment, please. Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Commissioner Rogers is abstaining, while other commissioners voting yes.
Okay, we move on to letter 3, recognitions. We have, looking out, we have one person here, so what I'd like to do is take items A and B together. That is the recognition of the following county employees retiring: James Chizik, retired from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office after 30 years of service. And also B, recognition of Dewan D. Hall from retiring from the Douglas County Department of Corrections after 20 years of service. Is there a motion to approve A and B? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Duda. And we definitely like to thank them for their tenure here in Douglas County and wish them well in their retirement. Please vote.
Motion passes. All commissioners voting yes.
Item C, resolution recognizing Douglas County Health Center Director of Nursing Mary Powell upon her retirement. Commissioner Duda.
At some point, Mary, I would ask you to come down, but before I read the resolution, I would like to recap briefly. In 1992, when I was a candidate for the county board, and I came to every county board meeting that year, that was before meetings were televised, and you had to come down if you want to know what was going on. And I watched the county board on a 2-to-1 vote by the Exarban racetrack, and then shortly thereafter say, we don't have enough money to keep the Douglas County Hospital going. We're going to close it. And at that time, it was a 5-member board, and one of the commissioners told me as a candidate, there are 4 votes to close the hospital. Don't get in our way. It was a bleak time for the Douglas County Hospital. But then I went on a tour of the facility led by Mary Powell, and was instantly became a fan and supporter of the Douglas County, what we now call the Health Center, and its mission. We've only had 3 directors of nursing going back something like 50 years now. I mean, going back to Helen Bergstrom, there was one in between Helen and Mary. We have a long tradition of a very strong director of nursing out there who should be, and I believe has been, a patient advocate at all times, an advocate for the residents. I believe this is what has helped make us a 5-star facility. So, consistently, we're the only ones around that have always been a 5-star facility. And I think that Mary gets a great deal of the credit for that. She's always been a little bit of a lightning rod, but I think it's because she's such a passionate advocate that she's ruffled a few feathers in her 31 years here, but I think it's always been for the well-being of our patients and residents, and I thank you for all that you've done. Come on down. Come on, Mary. I'm going to read the resolution, if I may. Whereas on February 9th, 1987, Mary Powell began her employment as a registered nurse with the Douglas County Health Center, at that time called the Douglas County Hospital. And whereas Mary quickly rose to become the director of nursing on August 5th, 1988. And whereas during her 31 years of service, Mary Powell has been a passionate advocate for the thousands of residents that she has been responsible for, and has been a strong supporter for the mission of the Douglas County Health Center, also serving as a charter member of the Douglas County Health Center Foundation Board. And whereas during her tenure, the Douglas County Health Center has had the rare distinction of always being rated as a 5-star facility by the Center for Medicaid Studies. And whereas Mary Powell will be greatly missed by the residents of the Douglas County Health Center and her co-workers and friends at the Health Center and in Douglas County government. Now therefore be it resolved by this Board of County Commissioners that we hereby express our sincere appreciation to Mary Powell for her 31 years of dedicated service to the residents and staff of the Douglas County Health Center, and further expresses the board's best wishes in all of Mary's future endeavors, dated today's date. And I would be honored to make the motion for the approval.
Motion by Commissioner Duda, seconded. Motion by Commissioner Duda, seconded by Commissioner Kraft. Okay. Mary, let me add to it. We, in a volatile, ever-changing environment, it wears on you. And for the, stamina, dedication, and just years of service, I want to add my thanks to that and wish you well in whatever your next career is that you choose to do. Thank you. With that, there is a motion and a second. You want to say anything?
I would just like to thank the board for the privilege and the honor of being able to work for Douglas County Health Center these past 31 years. It has been a phenomenal journey. Sure, it has at times been a roller coaster ride with ups and downs. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to acknowledge the very dedicated and caring employees at the Douglas County Health Center. They have been the backbone of that facility for all these years. They are the true pioneers, the ones who deserve the dedication and the recognition for that dedication for carrying it on. They are the ones that do the work, and they are the ones that deserve the recognition. So thank you.
Thank you. With that, please vote.
Motion passes, all commissioners voting yes.
Thank you, Mary. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your service.
And Mary, let me know. As I said to you just here, let me apologize. I rushed out to get here and forgot the resolution. It is there for you to have. Look at this.
You know my home address.
Yes. Commissioner Kraft.
Mary, yes. Your recognition of the staff as a backbone is part of your legacy. A lot of people don't recognize those who make strong leaders, and that's those who work with us and for us. Your strong leadership, but your recognition of the importance of a quality staff is one of the many attributes that make you great. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to acknowledge the members of the nursing management team that decided they were going to surprise me and join me today. They are the ones that will be helping to carry the legacy of Douglas County Health Center into the future. I have great confidence in them. They know what to do. They will carry the torch, and they will do it well and make all of you very proud. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, item D is a resolution declaring April 2018 as National County Government Month and to recognize the 2018 National Association of Counties initiative of serving the underserved, aiming at encouraging counties to focus on the critical role that counties play in breaking multi-generational cycles of poverty. And I want to read this and say a few things. It says, whereas the nation's 3,069 counties serve more than 300 million Americans and provide essential services to create healthy, safe, and vibrant and economically resilient counties. And whereas in 1991, the month of April has been National County Government Month, an annual celebration of county government and an opportunity to show that counties matter. And whereas in 2018, the National Association of Counties President Roy Charles Brooks's initiative is themed Serving the Underserved. And whereas the goal of this year's NACO initiatives are to encourage counties to focus on the critical role the counties play in breaking multi-generational cycles of poverty. And whereas in order to remain healthy and vibrant and safe, America's counties provide public health, justice, safety, infrastructure, transportation, technology, environmental stewardship, and economic services. And whereas Douglas County and all counties take pride in our responsibility to protect and enhance the health, welfare, and safety of residents in sensible and cost-effective ways. And whereas Douglas County invests nearly $100 million annually in justice and public safety services to keep our community safe and secure by providing law enforcement promoting crime prevention, administering justice, maintaining jail and detention facilities, operating 911 emergency dispatch centers, initiating disaster management response, and much more. And whereas Douglas County also invests nearly $75 million annually to promote the well-being of our residents, in part accomplished by health department programming, general assistance, and by operating our community mental health and long-term care facilities. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of the County Commissioners of Douglas County, Nebraska, that this board hereby declares the month of April 2018 as National County Government Month, and encourage all county officials, employees, schools, and residents to learn about the important role that counties play in the well-being of our counties and to participate in county government awareness activities. Is there a motion? Motion by Commissioner Boyle, second by Commissioner Borgeson. And I just wanted to note that because as initiatives go throughout the county, some stay, and I think that this initiative that's been going on around this past 6 or so months has brought a lot of things to the surface, and seeing some myself, actually being aware to a lot of things that were going on in some places that I wasn't even aware when I was president. I wanted to read and just know, I know myself, Friday I'll be going to an elementary school to speak a little bit about this, and just the fact that it's National County Government Month. But my hope is that the work this year through with the County Awareness Committee that Commissioner Borgeson put together will help definitely lift up the role that counties play in trying to break this cycle of poverty and the heightened role that's hoped to bring to it. So with that, please vote.
Motion passes. All commissioners voting yes.
Item 4 is citizens' comments. Are there any citizens that would like to comment on items not officially listed on the Douglas County Board of Commissioners agenda? Are there any citizens' comments? Seeing none, we'll go on to presentations. Item A is the JDAI Juvenile Detention Alternative Initiative Case Processing presentation. Ms. Shelley Hugg. And as she's coming, just to set the stage, Shelley's joined by the chair of our case processing committee, Ms. Joy Suter. The last time she was before us, she introduced to you the data memo, and there were questions regarding some of the youth that were there and the length of stays that were there. This is a key part of that, and I wanted to bring this to the board's attention. I was trying to present it in a Child and Youth Services Committee, but it kept getting moved and had to be canceled for certain reasons. I bring this before the board because this is an issue that Joy's chaired probably since its inception, and it's been one that we've been trying to crack for the last 4 or 5 years in conversations that Commissioner Borgeson and I have in regards to some related matters. I wanted to bring this to the board's attention because I think now at this point, after 4 years of trying to really get this through, I wanted to try to educate the board and enlist the board's help in trying to push us in getting here. My belief is that, based on some information that was presented in the past, if we can get a full-throated effort in this, it will help us to alleviate those numbers of kids in detention and hopefully move them through a little faster through service. So with that, I'll give it to Shelley.
Good morning. I am Shelley Hugg. I am the Juvenile Detentions Alternatives Initiative Coordinator for Douglas County. And over the past 7 years, Douglas County has participated in the Detention Alternatives Initiative with the Casey Foundation through a resolution from this board. And we have, like many other jurisdictions, had a pretty good decline in the number of youth who are daily in our youth detention center. When we look in 2007, we had an average daily population at the Douglas County Youth Center of 167 youth. At the end of last year, that population is about 79. So every day there are about 79 kids who sit in the Douglas County Youth Center. So like other jurisdictions that have started this detention alternative process, we too have seen a decline in the general numbers of kids who are in our detention center. We've shown that through changes to policy, practice, and programming in this county that we are able to make a difference in the lives of kids and families in Douglas County. We have several working groups under the Detention Alternatives Initiative that all support the case processing effort. So I just want to show you a couple things today that those working groups are doing to assist Joy and her team in moving the youth more efficiently through our system. Our Alternatives to Detention Committee, and I know up here you probably can't see it real good, but you should all have a full page copy. This is the current continuum of alternatives to detention in Douglas County. What this means is when a youth is presented to probation intake by law enforcement, and intake does their job in looking at the youth, understanding all the information, when we know we have kids that maybe are not a danger to our community, we don't need to detain them, but sending them home without any services also is not maybe the best for this youth. These are all of the things that we currently have available in Douglas County for probation intake to refer a child to for services. The continuum was just completed at the beginning of this year, and these services are available now to all youth that present to probation intake, whether they are currently on probation or this is their first step into our juvenile justice system. Our Disproportionate Minority Contact Group has done a lot over the last couple of years to get the word out about disproportionate minority contact, to get people to understand what this means, and to start looking at kids in our system in this way to determine, are there specific strategies we could have for certain populations of our youth that would keep them also out of the detention center and into services. Our Disproportionate Minority Contact Committee has invited in the Center for Children's Law and Policy. They were able to give us a couple really good trainings to kind of set the stage in Douglas County of understanding of what this topic means, what this term is, and things that we can do to find strategies. The same committee has held several meetings in our community. They have had on their work plan for several years the idea of a DMC coordinator in Douglas County, and were able to assist the county in writing a grant requesting Title II funds to hire that person for this county and be able to afford a study to find out if we can see why in Douglas County this is happening to assist us in strategies. Our Disproportionate Minority Contact Committee has also assisted us in the past with what we know one of our target populations to be, which is kids who are missing from the placement that they are supposed to be in. This committee has helped us through surveys of kids and families to find out why kids leave, what they think would have been beneficial when they came back as a service for themselves and their families to keep them in their home. And our DMC committee continues to educate and try to get this information out to people. It's new to some people, and so it's important that the education continue. And then our data committee, which is chaired by Commissioner Chris Rogers and Tyree Sikora of OPS. When I first started in this position, I knew that we had two target populations in Douglas County, and those were the disproportionate minority contact, and then also warrants. But we weren't real sure what that meant when I started. And through the assistance of our data committee, we were able to start breaking down these warrants to find out what are the warrants for specifically. There was an idea in Douglas County that the warrants may have been related to failure to appear, which we do see. We don't generally see those children detained because they failed to appear. Through the work with the data committee, we've been able to further define what it is our targets are when it comes to warrants, to talk about these children that are missing from their placements and strategies that we could use to get them back home. And those are just things that our other working groups have done to support our case processing committee. So our hope today is to give you guys an understanding of what case processing means and what we're doing related to that work. So today I have Joy Suter. Joy is one of the chairs of the case processing committee. She was employed with the Douglas County Public Defender's Office for many years and is now private defense bar for the kids that we work with. Joy.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. As already mentioned by Commissioner Rogers, I was the first chair of the case processing subcommittee upon its implementation. JDAI came to town in 2011, and in the fall of 2011, I traveled with Commissioner Rogers. I can't remember if Mr. Bloomingdale was also on that trip. Yep, he also was on that trip where we went to Multnomah County, Portland, to see how things work, how a good juvenile detention alternatives initiative site works. And what we learned there and what we continue to learn is that Multnomah County in Portland is a model site because it's been around in existence in utilizing JDAI principles for more than 20 years. And what I will tell you now is that they continue to use JDAI principles. One thing we all need to understand is that progress is never done. And while we may have some successes throughout the years, we're not going to be done. And as I talk to you about some of the successes we have had through case processing, I may on occasion explain to you how certain projects were fast-tracked and they took 2 years to implement. And there are reasons for that. We have legislative changes that constantly are going on that impact our work. We make efforts to implement things locally, and statewide there will be a law change. Or we try to do things locally and we don't get much traction, so then we take it to the state level. So I'll talk to you about that and some of the barriers that we've had throughout my time as the case processing chair, which has been since 2012. Now Judge Matt Kaler had been my co-chair from late 2012 until just last week. Greg Hepburn, who's employed at the Douglas County Youth Center as a transition specialist, he's now my co-chair in that subcommittee, and I'm excited about that and continuing to push our work forward. Some of this, in general, case processing works under JDAI with the primary goal of reducing unnecessary delay without sacrificing due process or public safety. How I can explain that to you best is how I explain it to neighbors and friends who ask, how can I defend those kids, or how can I defend adults? One, it's my job. Two, everyone has a constitutional right to an attorney, and I'm honored to fill that role, whether it was when I was in the public defender's office or now in private defense work. But that due process right is something that applies to all of us. I also am a human being. I understand public safety. I've been the victim of crime myself. So how I explain that is that I have my lawyer hat and I have my citizen hat. I'm not unaware of risks that adults and children can sometimes face. So that's how I can best explain that to you. We cannot sacrifice the due process rights of kids. We also understand that public safety is a primary component. That's even in our juvenile code in one of the first sections of 43-246. But to that end, that's what case processing looks like. We will not sacrifice the rights of juveniles for the sake of moving them faster through the system. We do those things in conjunction. We also, in case processing, for it to be successful, for us to improve our practices, we have to change the behavior of the system's stakeholders, the offices that are responsible for the practices and procedures that impact those very same kids. So we're talking about administrative actions of adults. We're talking about every agency that impacts or touches a child throughout their time as being system involved. And in Douglas County, that starts with the prosecutor's office. It can include the Juvenile Assessment Center. It includes the Douglas County Youth Center, the Public Defender's Office, the Private Defense Bar, court administration, the judges, the bailiffs, all of these different players. So we're looking at the people, the adults that are involved in trying to correct things. We are also more effective, especially when we're dealing with kids, if we have immediate response time. If my child does something wrong today, I don't say, I'm going to get back to you in August about this, right? I'm going to immediately address that behavior. And if I'm representing a child today who is alleged to have committed a crime back in September or October, there's a problem there. That delay loses the efficacy of the purpose of juvenile court. We also want to make sure that while JDAI stands for Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, we do understand and believe that by improving practices that affect detained youth, it will also improve our system overall. So some kids that we deal with in juvenile court have never hit the doors of detention, and that's wonderful. We want fewer kids to hit the doors of detention. We want there to be more interventions early on so we can reduce that number. But that being said, our focus doesn't just focus on detained youth, but it is a primary emphasis. Some of the successes that we've had in the case processing subcommittee include the right to counsel for juveniles. Now, we didn't create this right to counsel, but it's on here because in the olden days, meaning like 4 or 5 years ago, it used to be that children would come to court and at their first appearance, at their arraignment, then would be asked if they wanted an attorney, which is generally how adults' cases are handled. Other jurisdictions across the country were assigning counsel at the time of the filing of a petition. We realized in Douglas County, we were seeing firsthand that we were having duplication of hearings because counsel wasn't appointed immediately at the time of the filing of a petition. And so in Douglas County, as an entity, we decided that for juvenile delinquency cases, we would appoint counsel at the time of that filing, and that has proved to be a great success, which has now been replicated across the state. We now have a state law that ensures in the counties that have separate juvenile courts, defense attorneys are appointed at the time of filing. Those 3 jurisdictions that do that appointment of counsel at the beginning have shown greater efficiency in how they're handling cases and fewer delays in moving things forward. We also have worked on a process that's called system mapping, and that's where we lay out a map that charts a path of handling a case from start to finish. Now, we spent about 1 year on that system map, and it was grueling work, but we got it done. And then we had a big law change in 2013 that removed Health and Human Services from all juvenile justice cases. And we had to kind of go back, not to square one, but square two. And we're still working on implementing that, creating a new system map. That's important because that allows us to track delays from one stop on the map to the next. That should be done within the next 3 weeks, and I'll be happy to present that here. We'll need to get approval from the JDAI Collaborative to utilize that system map for Douglas County, but I'm happy that that's about to be finished for the second time. We also, through JDAI, have a risk assessment instrument that's utilized when kids hit the doors of Douglas County. That is the screening tool. It's similar to the pretrial release process that happens for adults when they hit Douglas County Corrections. The risk assessment instrument is a tool that's utilized to assign a score to a child, which determines whether or not they should be released without restriction from DCYC, meaning never admitted. If they should be released with an alternative to detention, that's what that continuum is that Ms. Hugg handed out to you. That includes things like electric monitoring, home on zero curfew, if the child needs to have an immediate foster care placement or shelter care placement. Finally, we also, some more successes, we have got, in the area of working on warrants and reducing our number of warrants, we now have to have, probation has to have a supervisor approve the issuance of a warrant for a child rather than a probation officer or someone else making that decision. The home program, which is through Douglas County Youth Center, has expanded their times and their services, so they're available 24/7. So if a child is arrested at 1 or 2 a.m. and come to the doors of the youth center, if they're approved for the home program as an alternative, which would be that electric monitoring, the home program has someone on call who can go with that child back home, assemble the electric monitoring bracelet to their ankle, and that kid can spend their night at home with their own pillow rather than spend a night in the youth center. We've increased the number of youth that are screened upon entering the doors of Douglas County Youth Center, which increases the use of alternatives to detention, which then decreases our daily population at the youth center. We also have increased the number of youth of color who are screened. This is something that I never really fully understood was happening, but we had a large number of youth of color who for some reason were not being screened by that risk assessment instrument. Now that's happening. Our probation intake staff has decreased the number of parent refusals. What does that mean, you might be thinking? How can we as parents refuse? We had a large number of kids who were being brought to the youth center for various behaviors, and parents were saying, I don't want them, keep them. And we had a long history of that happening. It doesn't happen anymore, I'm happy to say. And that's because the probation intake staff had some training on how to be assertive to those parents and say, actually, no, you need to take your kid home. This isn't an option. The alternatives to detention that are now available, Shelley has talked about that already. I hope that you have heard about our crossover youth model, which is the crossover team deals with kids who already have open child welfare cases. And those kids have a higher rate of likelihood to be involved in the juvenile justice system. And through a partnership with Boys Town and the juvenile court, we have a great program now which is working to keep those kids out of the juvenile justice system by increasing services that are available to them under their child welfare dockets. A really important victory that I want to focus on and use this as an example of how long it can take to get things done is the following. We used to have a very common practice where if kids had warrants for failure to appear at court, and if they happened to be at school that next day, they were being arrested at school, taken to the youth center. Depending on the time of day, they might spend a night at the youth center, come to court the next day to have that warrant canceled. Those children suffered the embarrassment of being arrested at school and taken out in cuffs in front of their friends. Their children or their parents had to leave work. They spent a night away from home only for a warrant to be canceled and a new court date to be set. I want to explain to you how we got this practice changed. At JDAI collaborative meetings, which at the time were once a month, I would mention this. I would say, wouldn't it be great if we weren't arresting kids at school for having missed court? And then the next month I would say, wouldn't it be great if we changed this, if we weren't arresting kids at school for missing court? And then the next month I'd say it again. And about 18 months later, I said it again. And a representative from the Omaha Police Department said, we don't like that practice either, actually. And the probation office said, yeah, we don't like that either. That takes up a lot of work of our time. All of a sudden, the probation office was able, and in conjunction with the county attorney's office, was able to create a new process whereby if a child missed court and if they're at school the next day, the student resource officer invites that person into their office. They call the probation intake office. They cancel the warrant. They get a new court date, and the child goes back to class. It took 18 months for that to happen. Why did it take 18 months? People weren't ready. People didn't understand the time and the money and the effort that went into that, and people didn't maybe recognize the effect that it had on children. But I want to focus on that for you for a second because Commissioner Rogers is frustrated, I'm frustrated, and a lot of people are frustrated who come to the table month after month for meetings to work on system improvement. Some of the things that we're working on right now include repeated meetings. There are a lot of meetings, and a lot of people complain about a lot of meetings. I believe that if meetings are fruitful and productive, then it was a good meeting. I also believe that sometimes tensions have to get a little bit high for it to be a good meeting, because that means you've really gotten to the substance of the issues, and progress is about to happen. And I think we're there right now in Douglas County. We are desperately trying to work on this warrant situation that we have. We have a very large number of kids that sit at DCYC for warrants for unlawful absences. Now that means that they could have run from home, they were court ordered to be at home, and they took off. It could be that they were at a placement, they were at a shelter, they were at a group home, that type of a thing. When those kids leave placement, especially at the group home or shelter level of care, that court order says, what the warrant was issued says, they must be detained until their next court hearing. And that then kind of ties the hands of being able to access these alternatives to detention. We have presented to the judges the possibility of a two-tiered warrant system. Can we have some warrants where just by nature of the fact that the warrant has been issued, it says this is a non-detainable offense? We've suggested the possibility of an amnesty day. We have a large number of kids that are repeatedly on a list of missing because they have warrants from juvenile court and maybe don't want to present themselves because they don't want to be detained. Those are hard fixes because, again, I recognize public safety, but I also recognize the due process that's involved, and we want to make sure that these kids are being treated evenly and fairly across the board. But we're working on that warrant system and trying to figure out a better way to address those populations. We are participating right now in a community of practice, which is set up by the Annie Casey Foundation with about 6 or 7 other jurisdictions across the country that are also honing in on case processing issues. We are also are working on assessing our use of evaluations in juvenile court. Are we over-relying on them? Are we looking to utilize those for the wrong purposes? Does probation have the right number of providers in order to get those evaluations completed quickly? We're working on improving the process for processing motions to revoke. We have a large number of kids that sit at DCYC on technical violations of their probation. That's a poor use of time if a child is sitting at DCYC, because DCYC is not a placement. DCYC is a holding place. It's a stopgap measure until that child can be put in a placement, whether that be home or a group home or something else. But a placement in juvenile court terms is a place where a child is receiving those rehabilitative services that the court has ordered in order to assist that child on getting things back on track. We're also working with DCYC to try to enhance some of the practices internally that they have going on and getting information to defense counsel quicker and sooner so that we can improve practices as well and bring attention to the court to move cases along. I want to talk to you though about this site visit that's listed on here. About 3 or 4 years ago, we implemented in Douglas County a process called pre-detention hearing staffings. This was a system that we prepared based off of, we took what 4 other jurisdictions were doing around the country, which loosely is termed pre-detention planning. So if you have a child that's been arrested, they're going to have a detention hearing the next day at 2 o'clock here in Douglas County. We wanted to prepare, make sure all parties were prepared for that court hearing so that we could actually present some recommendations or some good solid information to the judges. That was another fast-tracked project that took us 1 year to figure out that plan, but we got it in place and we started that process. We had those phone calls in place for 2 years, 2.5, 3 years, and we had assembled some data from, we had a graduate research assistant who's a PhD, JD combined student, and she assessed the data that we had. We had 734 kids that had spent a night in detention, that had had the benefit of one of these pre-detention hearing phone calls. And the kids that had had the benefit of the phone call, where their defense counsel and the prosecutor were on the phone call, spent 14 days fewer in detention than those kids who didn't have someone calling in. This was a victory. It was a phenomenal victory, because if we look at the next slide, I can show you that this green bar right here was the first real full year. It was not the first year, but it was one of the full years that we had these phone calls in place. And you'll see that the average daily population went down significantly. So the green bar, the third column for quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, and along the bottom. In August of 2016, September of 2016, those phone calls stopped due to a misunderstanding about a court hearing. It's as simple as that. There was something happened in a court hearing. I wasn't there, I don't know what. But the next day, the county attorney's office stopped participating and said they would no longer participate. The public defender's office shortly thereafter followed suit. We have been spending time since 2016 trying to get these phone calls started back up, because what the data shows you, if you look at that 4th column, the purple column on this slide, is that our average daily population is increasing. I cannot and I will not tell you that that is only related to these phone calls, but I can tell you that we have data that showed that the phone calls made an impact, that when defense and prosecutors participated. The judges will tell you that while the phone calls were happening, parties were coming to court more prepared. They were more invested in their clients and in seeking swifter justice. We're in communication now with those offices, the public defender and the prosecutor's office, to try to start these calls back up. We have a site visit scheduled for April 25th back at, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. That's a jurisdiction that utilizes pre-detention planning. We are hopeful that that site visit will be an inspiration to some of the offices here in Douglas County to get them to start back up again. I believe Commissioner Rogers is going to join us on that trip, which will be great. We have commitment from the county attorney's office to join and are hopeful that someone from the public defender's office will also join. But to that end, what I want you to know also, before I wrap up, and I appreciate your patience, is that we've had JDAI in Douglas County for 7 years now. And Operation Youth Success has been in Douglas County for about 4 years now. And each of those entities have the same aim and goal to improve system practices and outcomes for youth. What I can assure you, and what I've learned in 7 years of chairing this committee, is that the stakeholder agencies have to acknowledge that there's a need for improvement before we can improve. And if there is resistance, if there continues to be a lack of willingness and participation and a desire to implement changes and improve things, we're spinning our wheels. And I know that anyone you ask who practices up on the 6th floor of the courthouse will tell you, and this is a broad statement, but I mean it, everyone will tell you we can do things better. It's hard to come to the table with ideas. It's easy to come to the table and criticize. I like to encourage people, for every constructive piece of criticism that they have, they also share an idea along with it for how to do things better. We keep trying. As I've already mentioned, we do things in conjunction with law changes, this, that, or the other. We wanted to try to implement in Douglas County tighter timeframes for handling motions to revoke probation and adjudications. We went through and we assessed national recommendations from the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, the National County Attorneys Association, the American Bar Association, and we presented those tighter standards to Douglas County through JDAI, and we got no traction. So what my co-chair at the time did then was take that information to the Nebraska Supreme Court Council on Children in the Courts, a Committee on Children in the Courts. And we now have the Nebraska Supreme Court Rule 4-201, I believe, that says, that has adopted those tighter standards. So I can assure you that if we don't have traction for some things locally, we do take it bigger. And we've had success doing that, I'm happy to say. But there are some things locally that need to change. And I cannot make that happen. Ms. Hug can't make that happen. Individually, we cannot. And I cannot, for my own sanity, take responsibility for system improvement in Douglas County. What I can do and what I will continue to do is try. I will continue to come to all the meetings that I go to. I can continue to mine the resources for best practices and to present ideas and to try to encourage collaboration. But if we don't have that acknowledgement from system stakeholder offices that things need to be improved, we'll continue to spin our wheels. So I thank you for your time, Commissioner Rogers. If there are any questions about case processing, I'm very happy to answer them. I can talk to you about 100 other different projects that we've also got going on that we're just waiting for the right time to move forward on.
And Joy, let me thank you. You got 4 for sure. No, you got 5 for sure. And depending on what happens after that, and before I go into them, I just want to note Joy's point, the last point that she made. Probably at year 2 of this, I was kind of frustrated with the meeting situation, and she kind of urged me to give a little more time. So now at year 4, I'm like, there's all the time we probably should need. And it's just befuddling me that we can't get over the hump with this meeting thing. And that's, again, why we're getting ready to go into the budget cycle. The likely chance is that, a lot of the players that have a role in this are gonna come here because they may be asked for budget changes. I don't know if it will pertain to this, but I'm just putting everybody on notice that, you know, at least personally, I'm gonna use it as a question to ask them their commitment toward this, because it's one of these things where she said it is a process. It never stops because something always comes up that needs to be changed. And this has had its day in the light for about 5 years, and I'm frustrated with some of the blocks that seem to get there. I mean, there's been verbal commitments, but the commitment to me hasn't followed through to get us to where we need to go. And just the point that was made about the bit of research that was done of days reduced, you know, I'm convinced personally, if you got that substantial amount of kids of color there, that you not only help move kids through the system, but you take a dent at that. And I almost think you need to get through this issue to be able to open up about what the next frontier is. So I just say that. I'm sure I'll have something to say again at the end, but I say that to try to help set the stage for them and thank them. And again, saying to the board, I've been trying to bring that here now because I do think it's at the effort now where I'm asking and need the board in a concentrated focus to help us get over the hump with this particular issue. So with that, who I have in the queue is Commissioner Morgan, Kavanaugh, Boyle, Kraft, Commissioner Borgeson. Commissioner Morgan.
Okay, thank you for your presentation and your work with our youth. On the second page, and I'll be brief, the average daily population, the second page, it looks like for 2017 over 16, there was like a 20% approximately increase in the daily population. Is it trending that way in 18? And I know it's early 18, but what do you think on the number, the change? Because you had it going in the right direction, you know, going back, and now we're going the other way, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts, if I could.
Mary Visick, who is the Chief Juvenile Probation Officer for Douglas County, assures me that the numbers are going up. Douglas County Youth Center personnel assure me that the numbers are going up. I have asked just yesterday, I requested from the court administrator's office data on the number of filings that we have for 2018 already compared to 2017 and the year before. There can be, but so the answer is, as far as the number of juvenile court filings, those continue at a steady rate. The number of kids that are hitting the doors of detention seems to be increasing. Now, so yeah, that's the short answer, and I don't want to go off onto a tangent. I am prone to do that, so I'm watching myself here.
Okay, so that's, you know, for all of us concerning, because I know, Commissioner Rogers, you've expressed that we thought we had to go in the other way.
I can confirm last week at this time, it was last Monday, the number was 91. I don't know what it is. I haven't checked the number this week, but last Monday it was 91.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Ms. Suter, thank you. That was a great presentation. I just have a few questions. And one of them followed up on Commissioner Morgan's inquiry. You know, looking at these graphs relative to average daily population, even with the uptick that we've experienced in 2017, we're substantially below the 2007. I don't know if that was a record, 167 level. You know, I don't know if what we're looking at here is anomalous or is there some driving reason behind it. We hear this from Douglas County Corrections relative to their population. They don't have any control over their intake. I mean, they take what shows up. So Douglas County Youth Center, kind of the same. They take what shows up.
Kind of.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is there some driver behind this recent uptick that you could point to?
What I can explain to you is the process of how youth are processed when taken into custody. And this is by statute, and if a child under the age of 18 has been taken into custody, they are brought to Douglas County Youth Center. Now, it doesn't matter, by statute, it doesn't matter what the charge is. Those youth are screened by a probation intake officer, and that is what the risk assessment instrument is. So the RAI is, a screening is done, and a number is assigned to that child, and it's the probation intake officer's decision whether that child stays detained or not. So step one really actually is law enforcement contact. Sometimes law enforcement has decisions and options regarding how they're handling youth and who they're choosing to take into custody and bring to the doors of the youth center. So step one is law enforcement. Step two then is probation intake, and that officer conducts an interview and a screening of that child and then makes a decision based on that score that's assigned to that child. Now, we also have a pretty solid override rate for that RAI. And so already the first two factors that I can suggest that lead to detention of youth is, one, the likelihood of law enforcement to take a child into custody and bring them to the Douglas County Youth Center, and then two, the screening of that child by a probation intake officer. A couple of years ago, we had a really high override rate. That override rate has gone down. Probation has put some safeguards in place so that supervisors have to approve those override rates. But ultimately, at that point in time, it's up to the law enforcement and probation intake whether there's even an entry, a booking, admission into Douglas County Youth Center. That would be for brand new kids with new law violations or kids who've been picked up on warrants. The other side of this is that kids can be detained, and this is why right to counsel is so important. Kids can be detained if there's an open juvenile court case. The statute and the law, it allows for kids to be detained pretty much at any time while they have an open court case, so long as it's a delinquency case. We have kids that get detained from the courtroom. They've showed up for a court hearing, a judge is unimpressed with their behavior, and they leave the room in cuffs and get taken to DCYC. I know that probation keeps data on how kids get into the youth center and for what reason, as does DCYC, of course. But that can include not just new admits, that branch of kids, but then there's also a warrant population who are just going to be there because they've run from placement or they've run from placement. But then you also have a number of kids who are being detained sometimes from the courtroom and for other sorts of reasons like that. So as far as the trend as to why this is happening, I don't know. I wish I did know. If we did know, we could snap our fingers and fix it. But to this point, those are really the three primary ways that kids make it into detention. And and violations of probation, which I think I mentioned.
And I want to thank you for your dedication. As an old public defender, I appreciate where you came from and what you learned there, and I agree with your analysis of, what motivates an attorney to do what you've done. It's important that we maintain our constitutional standards in this country, or we're not the country that we want to be. And you've done a great job on this, and congratulations and thank you on that. Looking through here, and when Ms. Hugg came before us, I don't know, a couple months ago maybe, with her annual report, it was very apparent, and looking through here, reading between the lines, it seems to be apparent as well, that we have a chronic, ongoing, disproportionate share of minority kids in this process.
Yes.
And my question to her at that point, and my question to you at this point is, why is that? I mean, I can't believe that the kids are any different than other kids in the general population in terms of they're good kids or they're bad kids. But we have, I think, maybe a majority of minority kids represented in the youth center?
It's in essence the opposite of our population split. Broadly speaking, Douglas County is 80% white, 20% youth of color, and the population at DCYC is typically the opposite of that, 80% youth of color, 20% not.
Okay, why
Yeah.
is that, if you know?
Well, based on a lot of the trainings that I've been to and in representing kids for about 10 years now, and I think we've got issues of implicit bias. We have issues of inconsistent, perhaps, and inequitable processing of youth of color, of handling cases differently based on zip code, different policing practices. If I knew the answer to that as well, I'd be happy to shout it from the mountaintops and fix everything. I think that I know that there are trends that probation has data on trends of spikes of increase of arrests. A lot of that is happening when school comes back in session. And there are a couple of other things that I can't speak to because I don't collect that data and I don't know all of what it entails. But I think ultimately we're dealing with long-standing issues within our country about disproportionate treatment of members of our public that are of color.
Okay. I don't disagree with what you're saying. It strikes me that what we're doing here in terms of, the JDI efforts that I applaud, are largely not directly engaging that core issue that you're talking about. And here's the problem with that. That drives our populations. And from just a coldly economic, financial point of view, that is expensive to us. So having a chronic disproportionate share of minority kids in this population is an expensive item for the taxpayers.
Yeah.
The social justice parts and the equality parts aside, if we were able to address that, we would be directly going to this population question. So that, whatever the percentage of kids of color, minority kids who are going into this, if they were going into it at the same percentages as white kids were going into it, these numbers would come way down, wouldn't they?
I agree with you, yeah. And I'm hopeful that with the hiring of the new DMC coordinator, that will add some impetus to offices to push forward and effectuate some change within case processing. I think every subcommittee for JDAI has a statement on addressing DMC, disproportionate minority contact, within their work. And how we do that within case processing is whenever we do a data assessment, breaking down that assessment by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, and offense. Through all of that data, which is very heavily tracked, it takes then the next step and a commitment to that next step to pinpointing where the egregious violations are, where the egregious actions are that keep driving up the population of youth of color and that disproportionate contact.
Well, that's great. And Ms. Hugg has done a good job of outlining that for us. I mean, her reports are pretty crystal clear that this exists. So, the next logical step would be, okay, what are we going to do about it? And I guess that's what I would be, looking at, drilling down on that. Much of what's here is fine, but it's kind of to the general population. I mean, you talk about the warrant systems and the assessment. That goes to everybody.
Right, yep.
But this seems to be geared towards a particular, discrete population of children in our system that's getting way more attention from whoever is driving this to put them in the system. I can't believe that they're any different than all the other kids in our system, and that radical of a variation exists simply because they happen to be minority kids. So going forward, I mean, if you can help us with this, I know that it's a big problem, it's a long-standing problem, there's probably no easy answer. That would be something I think that we'd like to see on the table here too. The assessment system that you recognize, I'm kind of familiar with that because I started out as a pretrial release interviewer a million years ago down in jail, and it has had a very effective impact on the criminal justice system for adults. The risk assessment instrument that you talk about, what is an override rate? How does that work?
The override rate presently, are we in the 30s? Okay, so the override rate at its highest, I think, was in the 60s, about 50-60% rate, and that was a big problem because it defeated the purpose of the RAI.
But who overrides who?
Probation intake was overriding the decision of the objective score of the risk assessment instrument and then detaining youth. And that override rate, so probation then retrained, hammered it out with the intake staff and said, we got to stick to this number as much as we can. The override rate has dropped significantly, but it's still at about 35%. Now, what I'll tell you, or 30%, I think, and I'm sorry I don't have the exact number. What my perspective on that goes a little something like this. We don't have full system buy-in on the RAI. We have some judges just don't like it, and I can understand the theoretical argument that you can't assign a number to a child. But we do know that on the adult side, the pretrial release scoring system has been utilized for years. I did bond settings when I was in the public defender's office, so I stood there and I heard the scores for every single person I represented. So there is some, so while theoretically we may not like the assignment of a number to a child and think that that can assign a risk to that child, there is precedent for the use of these systems of screening instruments and screening tools. Within Douglas County, and we have some people that aren't too impressed with the RAI. I know one of the exact criticisms that they have, the specific criticisms of it, is that it does not account for youth that have running behavior, youth that run away from home quite a bit. Now, to counter that, what I can tell you is that within the state of Nebraska is one of perhaps 2 states, we might be the only one, that handles runaway behavior as a juvenile justice case. In every other state in the country, they deal with it as a child welfare case. And so the RAI tool itself, while it's intended to be used for juvenile justice cases and it's modeled after other states, those other states don't handle runaways the same way that we do. So that's one of the criticisms of the RAI that I hear very frequently, is that it doesn't account for this running behavior. I think on the form, and we can bring it back if you ever want to see it, or I can email it to you, it says, does the child have a history of running? And maybe there's like 1 point. But it doesn't assess the frequency of running. So we'll have a judge, well, they only got 1 point, but they've run 10 times in the last year. So that's one of the criticisms of it. And again, that objective idea that you can't assign a number to a child.
So this override rate, 35%, whatever it is, do you know, and if you don't, just that's fine, whether or not that represents the same ethnic, racial disparity that we're talking about in the general population?
Ms. Hug can answer this.
Okay, sorry.
So I can tell you this, the biggest reasons we see the tool be overridden is 2 things. One, because the youth has absconded from a placement that they're court ordered to, so the intake officers can't let them go. There's a court order that says. Mm-hmm. And then the other is the risk to self, which is something that's in our state statute that you don't see a lot in other states anymore, because if a child's a risk to themselves, it seems the answer would be possibly medical attention or something and not detention. So those are the reasons we see it overridden.
Right.
The issue with the runaways is this tool's not meant to tell you the needs of runaways. It is meant to tell you if this child's going to appear to court or reoffend by their next hearing. So that's the difference there. Does that make sense? Does that answer
Yeah,
that
it does.
question?
The question I was saying is, does the racial disparity exist in the override rate that exists in the whole population?
Yeah, yes, and that would probably go to, this is part child welfare too, because we see kids at every point in the system to include out-of-home placement be disproportionately youth of color. So the kids who are coming in for warrants would be disproportionately youth of color because they were disproportionately ordered out of their home. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So it runs through the whole system.
Right.
Right.
And not just the juvenile justice system, it's the child welfare service, all the social service systems, all of the systems.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for your attention to this very important problem. I really appreciate your time and effort. I think that, if we look at these numbers, we're making some kind of progress. We're not making possibly the entire progress that we want to make. But it looks like if you go back to, 2007, that the indicators are in a positive direction. And it's not perfect, and we'll keep working on it. But I really appreciate your dedication to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Boyle?
First, I want to thank Commissioner Rogers for bringing this really important information to us. And the presentations that you've made, Ms. Suter and Ms. Hug, have really been very informative and understandable. I've got some questions, and I wonder whether, when listening to this and some of the other questions that have been asked by Commissioner Kavanaugh and others, I wonder whether one of the drivers behind all of this could be poverty as opposed to race. The reason I ask is that I was involved years ago with an affordable housing operation, and one of the boards that I was appointed to met in a 4-state region. And I was in Denver one time, and one of the members of the board was a Sister of Mercy. And we were placed on the board because the savings and loan people had misbehaved, surprise. And so there were 4 citizens on a 20-person board, and all we really did was just kind of pick at them a little bit, But in any event, one of the things that the sister brought up was that what really drives all of this in housing is poverty, that these are the things that make the difference. What are your thoughts about, do you have any, do you measure poverty when these children come in? I mean, what kind of a situation are they in when they come in?
The majority of the youth that are represented or that are system involved qualify for, not only because we have an automatic right to counsel, but they would have qualified otherwise for court-appointed counsel due to poverty issues. But I think statistically, you will also find that families of color are also predominantly suffer lower economic advantages than white people do. And so there is definitely an economic tie to it, but that also has higher representations of frequently marginalized members of our population.
Well, I think it's something that we need to figure out what to do about it. I'm not saying but the pressures on going to school and seeing how other children are dressed and so forth, all the rest of that, and just the whole issue of poverty, I think does affect, my family, we lived in St. Margaret Mary's, and every Easter vacation, a huge number of the families were flying to Hawaii and all sorts of places, and our kids said, how come we can't, I said, well, we can go up to Fremont if you want to, sit around the Fremont lakes. But anyway, so there's a whole lot of pressure going on for kids. I also have something I want to mention. You're probably aware of it, and this probably is not exactly a connection, but we have a contract with United Way that judges in county court primarily, but also some in district court, they use that as diversion to sentencing. And it's not something that would work with juveniles, because these adults, to avoid jail time and keep their jobs in the private sector, will accept nonprofit working at a nonprofit and Habitat or someplace. And that won't work for juveniles, but I wonder if there's some way to put together some kind of a diversion. I know that you do those sorts of things, but I wonder if there isn't some place where, some way that a diversion of some sort could work where, where the city has finally, back when I was there, we tried to get $250,000 and got it approved by one vote by the city council. Very progressive, by the way. But anyway, so now they have $1 million committed to jobs programs. In my estimation, I think poverty is a big driver of a lot of this. I think, is there any way to connect or hook up with the city and its jobs program to get some money in the pocket of these kids? I just wonder, have you worked on that?
So what I can tell you is that diversion is available in Douglas County for juvenile court kids, and that is handled through the Juvenile Assessment Center in conjunction with the county attorney's office.
Okay.
Another thing that for about a year, every month at those meetings, I would say, do we have any written guidelines for diversion eligibility? And then the next month, do we have any written guidelines for diversion eligibility? And then the next month. And I wasn't getting any traction at JDAI, so I took those concerns to an OIS policy meeting. And now there is a system assessment is happening of the Juvenile Assessment Center, which I am hopeful will expand the availability of diversion to kids.
Okay.
And through the Juvenile Assessment Center does phenomenal work. I want to be clear on that, and I think that they can do even better work and more work when we can open up the doors to diversion wider to more kids rather than having them system involved.
I want to ask a couple of questions about some offenses. Am I correct in stating that third offense graffiti is a felony?
If anyone is prosecuted in adult court, then that distinction of felony and misdemeanor makes a difference.
Okay.
And I can't remember off the top of my head because I haven't handled an adult graffiti multi-offense case in adult court for some time. But in juvenile court, for juvenile justice cases, there's very broadly two types of cases. There are delinquency cases, which would be offenses that are crimes if an adult were to commit them, or a kid, shoplifting, graffiti, damage to property. But then we have status offenses, which can only be heard in juvenile court. And those are behaviors that are only unlawful because of the age of the child. For example, truancy from school. You and I can't be forced to go to school. We can make that choice, right?
Yeah.
But for kids, they have to. We have compulsory education. So there are allegations, status offenses, truancy from the home, running away, truancy from school, uncontrollable behavior, things like that. And so, very broadly speaking, if a case is up in juvenile court and it's a delinquency offense, it's a misdemeanor or a felony, were it to be heard in adult court. But in juvenile court, that distinction doesn't play into the level of offense doesn't play into rehabilitation that's available for the juvenile.
One of the things in listening to you today and to Ms. Hugwood, I would like to see you get involved. Maybe there's not a need, but I think there might be. So many times the laws that are passed by the legislature will really have terrific effect on, obviously, everything that we do. And I wonder whether it wouldn't be a good idea for you to sit in with us and talk to us about legislation you think that we might need, that you would help cut through some of this red tape or whatever it is you want to call it that is hindering the care of these children, something that we could do to help. So I'd like to put that on your radar, and also to Mr. Marcos up there, a man Marcos, who does our legislative matters. I'm a little bit concerned about, I'm quite concerned about these phone calls that you say have been, that the county attorney and the public defender are not participating in. Can you talk just a little bit more about that? I mean, what is that? What's happening? Why? Do you know why that's occurred?
This is the $94 million question, or whatever that quantity of money is that made for a great TV show. I can't answer, and I can't speak for those offices, and I won't pretend that I can. What I know is we implemented a system, we fine-tuned it, we we honed it, we localized it, and it was working and it was having an effect. And it stopped.
Okay.
I have heard some of the reasons that have been given by those offices, and we've hashed it out in meetings over and over. And at this point, what I know is that those offices have committed to moving forward again on a trial basis. And that's what I'm holding on to, and that's what I'm hoping this site visit on the 25th can push forward on. But I can't answer the question. I can't answer that for those offices.
Well, and the other thing, I just want to, it seems to me that as with the treatment of adults, sometimes, the offense of failure to appear begins to trigger a lot of things that just start to spiral down and everything gets out of control.
Yeah.
And kids get picked up. I'm glad to hear they're not being pulled out of the classroom anymore. That's wonderful. Thanks for continually asking that question.
Yeah.
But I think we need to, look at some of these offenses. I was talking with a court administrator from the county, and frankly, the number was so high, I don't think I can remember it. I was surprised. But I asked him how many people there were in Douglas County driving on suspended licenses. I mean, it's like 18,000, and I swear he said something like 40, and I about fell out of my chair. 40,000, 18,000. These people can be yanked into court if they fail to appear. I mean, it just, wow, that is a huge social cost. The other thing, too, is I have always been, and this is probably pretty critical, but, we have a person who's deciding to file charges and so forth, and it's called a prosecutor, and his or her, when they do their study at the end of the year on how they've done on their job, I think they're, part of the criteria is how many people have you prosecuted. So, it's a mentality that I've got to prosecute. That bothers me a lot. And I don't know that there's any, I shouldn't make this statement, but I don't believe there's any social worker involved in these things. And I think that ought to be the emphasis. This is not a punitive system. It's not supposed to be. So anyway, I want to thank you for the work that you've done, for hounding on getting answers, and the results that you've produced. It's really difficult, but I can't thank you enough for the presentation, the clarity. I think it's terrific, and
Thank
I
you,
really
Commissioner.
appreciate and thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kraft.
If you'd be so kind as to give me your name again.
Joy, Joy, Joy. Suter, S as in Sam, U, D as in David, ER.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you.
You were talking about the risk assessment instrument, and I attended a brief little meeting regarding the risk assessment instruments for adult probation. And they were talking about it being based upon historical data, sometimes going back into the 50s. Are we using on the risk assessment for the youth current data or historical data?
I am not an expert in the development of that tool, but I will share with you what I know, which is that the use of a risk assessment instrument for juveniles is a relatively new practice, I'd say within the last 15 to 20 years. If I'm wrong, I apologize. But I know that the development of that tool within Douglas County, which is now has been adopted across the entire state, the development of that tool was done in conjunction with the Annie Casey Foundation, who is one of the foremost entities working on this topic.
Okay.
And it was also patterned after risk assessment instruments that are also used solely for juvenile courts across the country.
Because, as you mentioned, inherent biases.
Yes.
Okay. The adult has many inherent biases built into it because it goes back so long. I just want to make sure ours, especially for youth, does not. And I have that same question later for our adult risk assessment. Constructive criticism. I'm not sure that you asked, do we have all these times, when you say 18 times, if it was asked as do we have. But I've learned that many times if we ask a question differently, and that one is a simple yes or no answer. But if you say, why don't we have? All of a sudden you have to think about why we do or why we don't. So hopefully that's constructive criticism.
It is. I'm going to write it down. Thank you.
Okay, I'll give you a moment.
Why?
Or instead of why don't we have, a statement, we should have. Okay.
Yep.
Regarding youth missing court, how much of that is regarding transportation?
That was, I will tell you, about 6-7 years ago. I knew personally from the kids that I was representing that frequently transportation was an issue. And it was widely believed that that was a much bigger issue than it actually is. It does happen on occasion, but very infrequently is transportation an issue. And a lot of that, I think corrections to that, to finding rides to court, I think the importance of court is being conveyed more clearly now, especially to kids who have open court cases. And they may be aligned and signed up with services already, and those service providers frequently will drive families to court. So on occasion, yes, it still is an issue. It was not as big of an issue as we thought it was when we originally were looking into missing court.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
What about parental issues? Is that a major issue in the youth not showing up at court?
Parental issues can be an issue because if we're dealing with, as already indicated, we're dealing with primarily families that don't have a lot of money, and for parents to take time off work to come to court with their kids can be an undue financial hardship. We do have in our statute now the ability for parties to participate telephonically. So I have a couple of kids I represent whose parents I know cannot get off of work, and so we patch them in on the phone and we handle things that way. But it can be a hardship, yes.
Okay. And by the way, I really like the fact that you put acronyms and the definitions at the back. Thank you. And as you go through it, for some of us who can't remember acronyms, that's important. I would also like to thank our chairman, Chris Rogers, because of his dedication, involvement, passion on this issue. We need more passion, and we need more involvement with board members in the community, because there's so much we can do just by being there and making a difference, such as if we were to go into high schools and talk every chance we get. I haven't been asked to talk in a high school for 3 years, which amazes me. I haven't been asked to talk in a junior high for 3 years. Now, every March I get asked to go to a reading thing in grade school. That's still good. But yes, involve us as elected officials, involve city council people, state senators, as much as you see necessary and as much as you can. I'd like to thank you. This is a wonderful report.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Borgeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to add my thank yous to you all for the presentation and for our chairman of bringing this to the board. I think it's long overdue that we get involved with this. And Mr. Chair, can you remind me, when we talked the last week and we found 91 kids in our youth center, weren't 61 kids length of stay over 30 days? Was that the number?
That's what, yeah, I recall.
Okay. So when we talk about the number of children that are entering our detention center, I think the length of stay worries me either equally or even more.
Yeah.
And so we probably need to keep a close eye on that. When you talked about kids entering the system through law enforcement or probation, we could basically say that the kids staying, those components that affect the length of stay, would those fall on county attorney, public defender, and judges?
So factors that contribute to the average length of stay, that's your question? Okay, so I would say that my first clarification question would be, of those 91 children that you're talking about, we have to make sure that for purposes of juvenile justice, we're not including in that number kids who are sitting waiting for court on adult charges, because that's a completely separate entity. So if we have a 16-year-old who's waiting for a trial or for a transfer hearing or whatever in district court, those numbers have to be pulled out. So I don't know what data set you were looking at, but so that's always the first step that has to be taken when you're looking at the population of DCYC. Kids that are sitting at DCYC waiting on adult charges have a longer length of stay, and that contributes to the length of stay increasing because they are most frequently waiting for transfer hearings, which can take however long it takes, to even get that hearing scheduled. And then if they don't get transferred up to juvenile court, then they've got any pretrial motions, whatever it might be, before they have an actual trial. So that's the first clarifying feature. And clarifying question.
So Joy, can I just know for
Sure.
the record, it did include those. So that was included in there, and just to that point, that's what makes getting the kids on juvenile that can go through out of there as quick as possible, because I think as Brad said here to some degree, that number of adults, kids in their adult charges was increasing, which is making that number there.
Okay. So then regarding the kids that are there for juvenile justice cases, for juvenile court cases, I think that the top reason for delay is their waiting placement, which means they are either waiting, they've already been court ordered, for example, to a group home, and now we're waiting for a space to open up for that group home or for them to be accepted to that group home or whatever it might be. Those kids also might be waiting for a court date. Now, for that subsection of kids, we have to acknowledge that sometimes they are waiting at their own request, meaning they want to have a trial, darn it. They're not going to admit to something, and so we have to wait for that court date. I think most attorneys try their best to move those hearings up as quickly as possible, but there is some lag time between court hearings. Now, that can be for one of two reasons. One, it's the client's choice. There's going to be something to fight about, and so we have to wait for that assigned court time. Or two, it could be a delay in court scheduling. As you all know, we got last year approval for a 6th judge for juvenile court. Judge Kaler took the bench in October. Judge Thomas then retired in December, and we don't have that position filled yet. And so even though on the books now we have 6 judges, we still have not fully realized the impact that a full bench of 6 judges can have up in juvenile court in expediting cases, or having cases brought before the bench sooner. And then, what other primary reasons? Yeah, the primary reasons are they're waiting for placement. And that lends itself to issues that we have where we don't have maybe enough placements, or are we overutilizing placements? And so that requires more digging in. There's a trend nationally to provide services in the home rather than out of home at group homes or the like. And so that also is going to be a theory shift for not just Nebraska and not just Omaha, Douglas County, but across the country. We have states that are seeking, and there's a push to more in-home services. And so do we have the mindset yet where we're not thinking group home, but what supports can we put in place in the child's home?
Right. Well, and you made a point about the number of judges. I made this statement when the state was down there in Lincoln putting another judge in Douglas County, and we can have 10 more judges. I don't care what the number is, but if we don't change our system processes to move cases faster, then we're going to be sitting here 4 years from now talking about the same thing. So thank you for that explanation. And a lot of this is going to be disjointed because I wrote down as people were talking, but
Sure.
Commissioner Boyle's conversation about employment, I think that you always are looking for solutions, as I like that too. But if we were to expand the availability of diversion, that's great, but I think we need to really take a look at our day reporting agencies so that they help work with the youth to grow their capacities rather than just employment. I think that's an important piece of our diversion programs. And then, of course, diversion only works if our JAC is working properly, and so I'm anxious for that study of the JAC as well. The override, well, let me go page by page here. The alternatives, do we know, this is laid out great in terms of what we have. Do we have a capacity for each one of these programs, Shelley? And are we at capacity with these today, or do we know how many children, are in these and how much more we could possibly move to?
We do. I don't have all those numbers
Okay.
for you right now at the top of my head, but I can tell you with this committee too, their focus this year is finding out. So now we know what the alternatives are. We have a great continuum. Now we need to know, in breaking down our data, who's getting referred by race, ethnicity, gender, geography, offense where available, and then how are they working? And what is the length of stay there? Because we shouldn't really be seeing kids in alternatives more than 30 days either. Goes back to the brain development, so that's their focus for the rest of this year, is to give us deeper information about the alternatives.
Well, maybe when you come back, if you could give us those, that would be helpful. I mean, here again, throughout this, I mean, if you look back in 2007, we had 167 kids, which when you look in the overall scheme of things in other counties that have probably 10,167 kids in their system, we have 167 in 2007, and we have 79 in 2017 as an average. I think that we should be able to really get real specific on each one of these kids as to why they're staying as long as they're staying. Because we're not overloaded, I don't think, with numbers in terms of what we're seeing happening over at our detention center. That's just a statement. But the diversion programs I'm interested in, because again, that's where commissioners can be of assistance, that if we need capacity built in one of those or one that we don't have, we could be resources in trying to get those started in our community. And then as far as the DMC issue, we can have all the statements and initiatives in the world, but it's time that we take action, and I'm very, very excited that we had the federal grant that was able to hire our DMC coordinator. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again for as long as this initiative happens, we need to look at the system points. We had the study in 2014 that said we had a problem. And so, okay, we have a problem. So now how are we going to fix it? And this now will be the beginnings of this system, each system point being looked at to see how we fix it. And where do those DMC issues really lie? Where are the systemic problems? And I'm excited to see what that comes out to be. And then let's see here. The I'd be interested when you get that number of the filings from
Coordinator.
2017, that first quarter, what it looks like, almost first quarter, but what it looks like for 2000, the comparison for 2018. And that override rate, while it has been reduced, I think the risk assessment not only was probation, but I think our law enforcement working with probation also needs to be kept kind of in the loop, because I think they work together and those overrides happen collectively, not just individually per agency.
Understood.
So we need to really keep a hold of that. And the running behavior, I think it would be interesting, and I don't know for sure yet as far as a solution who would do this, but with the high rate that we have of unlawful absences, I think the question needs to be asked, what are they running from? You can continue to punish a child for running, but if we really don't know, I mean, there could be abuse going on, and they could be afraid to say. And again, I don't know if we're really digging into those, even asking that question in a productive manner.
If I can respond to that for a moment, two things. One is that in 2000, did you do that assessment of running in 2017 or 16? In 2016, probation looked at the data of every child who had run from a placement to figure out, was it one particular placement that was problematic? Was it, were they running based on, were kids of color running from this placement but not that place? We did that assessment. And for the year of 2016, the numbers of runners from the placements that are utilized was even across the board. So that was in some ways a relief, because there wasn't one placement that's shown as a horrible thing, that they all were equally had some issues. The second response to that is that at DCYC, Mark LaFleur for a time had a separate survey, and probation did as well, a survey for kids with running behavior who presented for that running behavior to see if there was consistency as to what those reasons were: abuse from home, social issues, whatever it might be. I think that I know that data has been assembled, and I believe it's being utilized by a running. There's a group through Operation Youth Success that's trying to look at runners and how can we serve that population better than we are right now. And I believe they have that information.
Okay, maybe we can get that as well. I'd be interested to see what the reasons were on those. I guess for me anyway, and again, I've said this many times, that the system that we have today, we have to ask ourselves a question. Is this a system that would be acceptable for my child to be involved in? And if the answer is no, and in my opinion the answer is no, then it is not good enough as a system for our community of our kids and our families. And so it is time to take action. And I think as much as, this isn't a exercise in calling people out, but it's an exercise in calling people to take action. And, just as the simple phone conversations stopped for, I don't care if it was a personality clash or somebody said something to torque somebody off, get over it and get back to work, because we have the kids and families that we are to be serving. This isn't about you, it isn't about me, it isn't about anybody other than the kids and families that we're serving. And so to me, that's a solution, is that we as a board can now start to really keep this issue in the forefront, to say this length of stay, nationally the length of stay is about 29 days. And so when I see our length of stay being in the 60s or above, I'm sorry, but that is unacceptable. And again, I'm not trying to call anybody out. I'm calling the system out. I'm calling us out as commissioners to take a stand and say, you know, the old saying, enough is enough. Well, enough is enough. A child who spends one more day longer than they need to in our system is unacceptable. And so I think you have from us today a commitment for us to help move those issues and look at these processes and try to make our system better. And again, it's all because of who we're serving, and that's our kids and our families. And so your persistence to continue to ask that question, why you do try to, you know, you bang your head on the wall and wonder why this isn't getting any traction after the first time you say it, I commend you for keeping that going. And it's the same way with this DMC issue. We have known for a long enough time now that there is an issue here in Douglas County with that, and now it's time to stop it. There's an issue with our length of stay being too high at our youth center. That has to stop. And all in all, I feel there are too many children still even getting into our system. And that needs to stop. And so you have my commitment to work with whatever system partners we need to in order to fix what is broken, in my opinion, right now in our juvenile system. And so thank you for the information, and I can look forward to continue to work with you guys.
Thank you, Commissioner Borgeson.
There's a lot of things that can be said to close, but I think we went on the JDAI site visit to Multnomah. There was some discussion, and I made this point, and I guess I'll make it here, and it was based on pretty much a sports story. And basically, when Michael Jordan came to the Bulls in '85 till about '91 when they won the first World Championship, he didn't trust his teammates, and every time he got to a critical point in the game, he'd take the shot and try to win the game by himself because he thought he had it in his sole power. So when Phil Jackson became the coach, they put in the triangle offense, and the game against the Lakers in Game 6 when Paxson hit the game-winning shot, the discussion in the huddle before the play from Phil Jackson, and he looked at Michael Jordan, the most dominant player in the league, his go-to player, and asked him, Michael, where does the ball go when you're double teamed? And he put his head down and didn't say anything. And he asked him again, Michael, who gets the ball when you're double teamed? And he didn't say anything again. And then he said it for a third time, Michael, who gets the damn ball when you're double teamed? And he said, Paxton. And he said, well, then pass him the freaking ball. And he didn't say freaking. So I just say that in regards to the triangle offense was a process. And Joy noted that JDI was a process. I'm glad that Commissioner Borgeson noted that, because pretty much that's why I brought it today, to get the board's commitment on this, because the process takes you through different points. And I am frustrated with the point at 4 years that one of the core issues, these case processing meetings that don't happen for whatever reasons. And I've tried in prior meetings with the players to some degree to get there, and there was commitment and they stopped. But I bring it here today and just open the data up more to the board that there's only a few players around here that can ask certain questions to certain people. And so I needed this year for the board to be able to ask that question and solidify that commitment from these players to do this, because just like that game, I need them to run the process, and I need them to make it happen, because we can't move until they pass the ball to the next player that needs to have it. So with that, this will be the ongoing thing. I mean, Commissioner Kavanaugh made the point of Shelley's presentation, that it was yearly. That's a quarterly presentation, so they're working on the next one to kind of give us an update on what the quarter looks like. And so again, to the board, it's my commitment to keep you educated, but this is the year that at least from this platform, but for this issue of case processing, that I promised them to drive in every avenue to keep asking that question. So particularly with Joy, I want to thank you for the years you've been there, and Shelley for the commitment, and look forward to the next time that we need to open this back up. So I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner
can I
Moore.
ask one more question? Did you
Sure.
say, Joy, that today it is written in law that the warrants say that if the child violates the warrant, they shall be detained?
I'll clarify, when a capias, when a warrant is issued from the court, that language says that the child shall be presented to the Douglas County Youth Center.
Oh, to the youth center.
Correct. So what I was,
Well,
the
detained,
references
yeah.
that I made to law are that probation intake by law has the control over the entry into DCYC through their risk assessment screening instrument and through their decision whether they accept that number or whether they override that number and detain a child. As far as warrants go, a warrant is if I have a warrant out for my arrest and I come into contact with law enforcement, they run me up and they see Joy Suter as a warrant, and if I'm 16, they're taking me right to DCYC. So there are some cases where there can be a court order that is affiliated with the warrant, with the language saying to be detained at Douglas County Youth Center when the child is located, which would make that RII, that it circumvents the screening
Assessment
tool.
process.
Yep,
Okay.
okay.
And we know how many kids, those are those unlawful absences, basically, that's the largest reason for,
Yeah, I'd say the unlawful absence, as far as kids a child who has a court order to be detained would be an unlawful absence or an immediate custody, which is, they're changing the language on that, but they're in essence the same thing. This child is to be detained. And that would be on a court order that says that.
okay. And just one last, which I remembered you talked about, the wraparound services. I've been a proponent of that from the way back when. And so if we could use more of that, I think it goes to speak to what Commissioner Kraft was talking about in terms of parent involvement, because our system speaks out of both sides of our mouths when it comes to parents. And we saw that as a sample one time when a family came to our OYS meeting, which I was glad they did. But we damn parents for not being involved. We blame all the time that it's the parents not being involved. And rightfully so sometimes, I get that. But then, when the child becomes system involved, we start to build this wall between the child and the parent. So if a parent is getting too involved, we push them away. And to me, that's another systematic approach that needs to be, a systematic problem that needs to be fixed. And I think the wraparound program that has, again, been in existence forever, Carl Dennis days, back in Philadelphia, I believe it was, that proves keeping the family intact and keeping the family together and keeping the family involved is better for not only the child but the family and then the community as a whole. So I'm glad that we are still talking, but I hope to move stronger in the area of wraparound programs.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Joy, appreciate it. Because I know you billable on yourself now in the government, so I appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right. Whitney, while you're setting up, I'm going to ask, I've had a request we've passed citizens' comments, but there's a citizen that would like to comment. So while Whitney's setting up, Louise, I'm going to ask you to come and say your piece. And since we're past it, I'm going to ask you to be brief. Okay, so do it now before she sets and get to it.
Thank you. Okay. Can I have access? I've got a graph.
Maybe say your name.
Luis Jimenez, 518 North 40th Street. Thank you. There's a graph here I would like to show the commissioners, and it's funding and publication volumes for gun violence I prefer the term firearm violence. So can I get access to the internet, please? Here. Oh.
Open another tab, don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. There you go. Thank you.
I'm going to use this to read the conclusion. So, David Stark.
You need to be in the mic, please.
David Stark and Nigam Shah did a research about how much funding firearms violence receives versus other forms of deaths, and how much publication they also receive firearms violence opposed to other forms of deaths. And as you can see in the map here, gun violence is an outlier when it comes to funding. It's right here. And then we have hernias, not too many deaths, relative. And then we got cancer and heart disease over here, and then HIV, and then intestinal infection, fires, drowning, not too much funding. Falls gets about as much gun violence research funding, but it gets less, but it's about the amount of gun violence deaths relatively. And then publications, gun violence still is an outlier here, well, because there's no funding, so there's no publications really. And then heart disease, cancer, penetrating wounds, drownings over here, liver disease. So I imagine that Douglas County or the city haven't funded any sort of research, and you know that there's a ban of federal dollars going to the CDC for gun violence research, and that's political. Has nothing to do with reality. So if I can get the results, compared with other leading causes of death, gun violence was associated with less funding and fewer publications than predicted based on mortality rate. Gun violence had 1.6% of the funding predicted, and had 4.5% of the volume of publications predicted from the regression analysis. Gun violence killed about as many individuals as sepsis. However, funding for gun violence research was about 0.7% of that for sepsis, and publication volume about 4%. In relation to mortality rates, gun violence research was the least research cost of death and the second least funded cause of death after falls. And even though we don't know if firearms violence is preventable, you have to research the mythology of firearms violence. I hope that term, mythology of firearms violence, is something that people can accept. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now continue back with presentations in item B, the Severe Weather Awareness Week presentation.
Hi, I'm Whitney Shipley. I'm Assistant Director of Emergency Management here, and I have two issues I wanted to share with you today related to emergency preparedness. The first is to let you know, if you're not already aware, that we are starting yesterday in Severe Weather Awareness Week, and this is, as I have up here to show you, actually a national initiative sponsored by the National Weather Service. Each state has the opportunity to choose the week that works best for it, so that you can see here in other states use other dates. But here in Nebraska, it's typically the 4th week of the month, and so this week it's the 26th through the 31st. And this is a time when the National Weather Service actually boosts its engagement and the efforts that it does, and tries to call attention to the public of the fact that this is obviously at this time of year a threat that it's especially interested in. And so there are 2 opportunities with that particular initiative that interface with the county directly. One of those is actually this evening. Annually there is a National Weather Service Storm Spotter training. This year's will be at 7 o'clock this evening at Elkhorn South High School. And that's the time when the National Weather Service trains members of the public, and we typically get about 200 people there, so it's a pretty popular event, yes. And that's when the National Weather Service trains the public in the kinds of things it would like for the public to call the Weather Service with and report, just citizen reports at large. But then we too here in the county are interested in storm spotting, but we work with 2 affiliate groups, React and Aries, to do the spotting for us, and they have 2 additional tiers of training beyond what the representatives do that are trained by the Weather Service. And so our interaction with that is we host the event. We've made the arrangements tonight. We'll be doing the opening remarks and some welcome information, but then we also use that as an opportunity to recruit potential spotters for the other 2 groups. And those 2 groups are present and are available to speak with folks afterwards and kind of educate them about ways they can get additionally engaged, not just with working with the Weather Service, but actually here with us also directly. So that's the first opportunity. We encourage you to attend, and any others that would like to attend. That again will be this evening at 7 o'clock at Elkhorn South High School. And the second thing that happens Severe Weather Awareness Week that directly touches the county is the National Weather Service practices their warning sequence at approximately 10 o'clock on Wednesday of this week. It's usually Wednesday of Severe Weather Awareness Week. So as they initiate their process through the kickoff through the entire state, it moves from west to east. At some point, they will practice the process of letting our communications center know that a mock tornado warning has been issued, and then we will sound the sirens in response to that. So they'll practice their initiation sequence, and then the dispatch center here will practice receiving it and sounding the siren. So that'll occur at about 10:15. Mind you that that's different from the monthly training that we do here in the county. We test ours on the first Wednesday of each month at 11 o'clock. This is separate from that, but it's important because it's a good opportunity. Many of the schools and businesses have come to use that over the years as their opportunity to practice a tornado drill. So that's what that. Then the other thing I'm pleased we're going to be announcing this evening, and it was just released yesterday, is a community preparedness survey that dovetails with Severe Weather Awareness Week nicely. You can find the survey highlighted on our website. It's prominently displayed at the beginning, as you can see. It's readyomaha.org. And this is a community survey that we've worked with the Public Policy Center at UNL to put together to survey the public to make sure we're aware of what their biggest concerns are with regard to disaster preparedness, looking at the types of threats that they're interested in, looking also at what their perception is and awareness and value for different public outreach opportunities that we can provide to them. We asked questions about their preferences for emergency alerting. We also asked for their awareness of different types of threats that are common here in our county and what their relative value is of importance for those. We also asked what public outreach activities they were engaging in, and for those that they weren't, why that might be the case. We'll be running that survey through the month of April, and at the end of April, UNL Public Policy Center will compile those results and present those to us, and then we'll have those available to share with you. So we're really excited to be able to have that available and tie that to Severe Weather Awareness Week because the 2 are very closely related. We were able to release that on our social media sites yesterday. Leah's been working with us, and we'll be working directly with the media to do some broader notification about that as well, and that'll occur probably late this week, more likely next week. We're excited about that. We already had a lot of activity yesterday just after releasing it on the county's Facebook page and our own, so we're pretty optimistic that we'll get good feedback for that. And we're excited about that. It's always good to hear what the community's priorities are, see if they match our own, and how we can modify our public outreach strategies to match those. So those are the 2 things I had to share with you. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Paul regrets that he's not able to join you this morning. He's meeting with FEMA officials at headquarters in Kansas City. He'll be back in on Friday, so if you have any questions, you can direct them to him or me. And that's all I have. Please do take the survey. I think it takes less than 5 minutes. I'm curious to see what your feedback is, and then share it with those you think that would find it appropriate. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. We'll now move on to committee reports and discussion. Item A is finance. Item 1 is the budget report. Commissioners Morgan and Board.
As presented.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to item G, Human Resources. Item 1 is the weekly personnel report from Civil Service, and there's nothing to be reported from there. Item 2 is legislative issues. Is there anything you want to update on legislation? Nothing at this time.
Mr. Chair?
Commissioner Borges.
Keep wanting to call
I've been hanging out with
Morganson.
Boyle on this.
She looks like me, that's
Thank you, Daddy. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know LB 776, which had to do with our inmate telephone system. Not only do I want to thank our lobbyist, Sean Kelly, for the work that he did on it, but there were many senators, but one of the standouts was Senator Groney, who worked tirelessly to make sure that we were not affected or hurt financially in the end result of LB 776. And I just want to publicly thank him and, again, Sean as well for staying on top of it and working it as hard as he did. It, again, would have been a huge hit to our taxpayers, and it worked out well, so thank you.
No, and I want to thank you for making that point. I mean, we say a lot of times we have comments about the Western senators, but he was a champion on that, so it's a great point. Commissioner Kavanaugh.
I got a couple things. On that 776, it reminds me that Senator McAllister was a sponsor of that, and we want to thank him as well for the compromise that was worked out. His flexibility was important in that regard. And I'd like to give a shout out to his brother, a former county commissioner who's here today, Steve. Welcome back.
Good man.
That's good to know. And just a quick announcement, the Administrative Services Committee will be meeting today at 1 p.m. in room 903 regarding some updates on public policy and the public safety bond issue.
Commissioner Kraft and then Morgan.
Very briefly, for the public, this particular resolution was in regard to how much we charge for inmate phone calls. In Douglas County, all of the charges on inmate phone calls goes back into programs for the inmates. So the inmates are benefiting. We do not excessively charge, but we provide programs where they can learn interviewing programs, job skills, programs to prevent them from coming back into our system again. So ours is reasonable. None of it goes to the general fund, and that was part of the complaint from many of the western counties, is that the money goes to their general funds and are to commissions to the jailer, and we do not do any of that. Thank you.
Commissioner Kraft, you asked for a point of privilege if you want to do that now, because we're going to go into executive session.
Yes, as a point of personal privilege, I would like to point out that our internal auditor, Mike Dwarnicki, audited the election commissioner's office and the process and gave us glowing reviews. Also, since this is National County Government Month, perhaps we should reach out to the high schools and ask to talk to the government classes, especially with the current youth activism, the Enough to Enough cause, enough is enough. I'm having a little difficulty, my mouth is dry here. But we should talk to all of the high school government classes and see what we can do to encourage youth to participate in the system, to participate in registering to vote. And if they're not old enough to register to vote, to learn what county government does, along with all of their government officials. Thank you.
Thank Thank you. Commissioner Boyle.
Yes, I'd like to ask the chair to consider with if the board would agree to this. Sarpy County has requested that they obtain control of, I believe it's Highway 350 in Sarpy County. They have just recently had another fatal accident, and they've had quite a few. And the state is, at this point, apparently refusing to put traffic lights or any other kind of traffic control up. And the chair of the county board, Jim Warren, has asked the state for some permission to put up traffic signals and so forth to slow the traffic down and do something to calm it. I'd like to ask the chair to ask staff to investigate whether or not this is something that we ought to contact Sarpy County and see if we can offer support in the way of a letter to the state saying, you know, the county, please respect what the county is asking for, if it is appropriate, and I think it probably is. But would you consider that, Mr. Chair?
No, you are on my head. Actually, I got a note on my desk, and I just reaffirmed it now to kind of continue what Commissioner Borgeson was doing, and to see if Patrick and I can get together with their CAO and the board chair just to stay up to speed. So Patrick, if you can set that up.
Good.
And we'll bring it up. I'll talk to you about it. Okay. With that said, we do have a need for executive session on litigation, and nothing else, and it should be real brief. So with that, if we can have a motion to go into executive session for the purpose. There's a motion by Commissioner Boyle, seconded by somebody, Commissioner Morgan.
I'll second it.
And again, that motion is to go into executive session for litigation. Please vote.
I vote yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh. Motion passes. All commissioners voting yes.
And again, for the public, we're going into session for litigation.